All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm David Meyer. I'm the Dean of the Law School here at Tulane. And I'm so pleased on behalf of Tulane to welcome all of you and to welcome the ABA here to campus to this special program. I think out of all the many exciting initiatives that have taken place at Tulane over the past dozen or years or so since I've been here, the Women's Prison Project is really one of the ones I'm most proud of, not because I have anything to be proud of it, but because of my colleagues and students and the work that they have done in creating this really incredible program. So it's a great honor for me to be able to welcome you here and for myself to be able to listen to the program that's about to get underway. I'm particularly proud of this program because for one thing, it reflects for me, it's a model of what is possible through the collaboration of faculty members, because this is a project from our collaboration of our domestic violence and criminal justice clinics that came about because of the conversations that faculty leaders of those programs had organically through sharing their own experience and expertise and recognizing the opportunity to have a huge and desperately needed impact in the world through collaborating their talents and expertise and the energy and expertise and dedication of our students. And to see what this has become through, I should acknowledge also the incredible impact of philanthropy to make this possible through donors who saw and shared the vision for what this could be. And made it possible for us to hire an incredibly talented team of faculty and staff who have come together to make this have an incredible impact on the world. And I'm, of course, proud because of the phenomenal impact it has had, and I'm going to let others tell that story, including the former clients. We're so honored to be joined today by three former clients of the project, Candace Malone, Sandra Starr-Pero, and Beatrice Taylor. And I want to thank each of you personally for being here and sharing your stories with us. And it's really a privilege to have you. And furthermore, so proud of the work that they are doing because now not only sharing their experience, but now they are dedicated to the work of advancing the cause for the interests of other women who are many still incarcerated in circumstances that desperately need recognition and advocacy. So it's an amazing story. And finally, I want to thank the ABA Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence and thank the staff and leadership of the commission here in sponsoring this and organizing it, and for their collaboration in this. So without further ado, I will hand off to the chair of the commission, Mary Carmen Garza, for her welcome and to get us underway. So thanks, Mary Carmen.
Thank you, David, for that warm welcome. It is our profound honor to be here today with you to share what is the third of our sessions at the ABA Commission during this mid-year session. And this is a program that is especially important for us. I first learned of the program through Becky when she served on our commission and became fascinated by the work that she was doing. So it was great when we learned that we were coming to New Orleans, and we immediately knew that we needed to highlight the tremendous work that's happening here at Tulane Law School for this particular issue. I personally have been a legal services attorney that works exclusively with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking for over 20 plus years. So the need of the work that we do and that we collaborate together is urgently important. I also want to thank the survivors who are here to speak. Thank you for your courage, your bravery, and can't wait to listen to your stories. With that, I would like to thank Kasana and Becky for all your work to get us to this point where we can start our presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all our virtual and in-person attendees. I'm Kasana Duran. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Women's Prison Project. And as advertised, we want this to be an interactive meeting. So you'll be hearing from panelists, you'll be learning about the work of the Women's Prison Project. And then in between those presentations, I want us to be able to digest the information, reflect on how it might be applicable in the various communities that we're coming from, and then think towards the future and how we can collaborate after today in order to advance this work and make sure that it's impacting more women so more women can gain freedom. So with that, there'll be breaks in between our panels. You can have a little notepad, you can type, however you feel comfortable. You could talk to people who are in the room with you if you are sharing space with other people. And then at the end, I'll have a big assignment for homework that we can do after this. So that's a little bit of like the run of the show. You all have received agendas. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our directors, Becky Conkar and Catherine Mattis. Thank you.
Sorry. So I'm just going to take a minute. Again, my name is Becky Kandkar, and I'm the co-director of the Women's Prison Project. And I want to just take a minute to talk about the project itself and give you a quick overview before we hear from our panelists, which is, of course, the most important part of our day. This is actually an incredibly meaningful day for our entire team because we are not here to tell their stories for them or to talk about them. We are here to listen to them tell their stories in their own words and with their own voices. And the reason their voices can be heard today is because they have come home. They have come home to their families, and they have come home to their communities. And because they're willing to share their experiences in this forum and elsewhere, we can all have hope that more women will come home too. For the vast majority of incarcerated women, including the women you'll hear from today, histories of abuse and trauma play an outsized role in their trajectories to prison. Our Women's Prison Project represents women who are serving life or long sentences for having killed abusive partners or for having participated in crimes that were associated with the abuse they experienced. The problem that our project addresses exists in every state in the nation. It is not a Louisiana-specific problem, but Louisiana's excessive reliance on mandatory life sentences without parole, coupled with our history of non-unanimous juries, means that women are especially likely here to be serving excessive or unjust sentences for basic acts of survival. And that means not wanting to die at the hands of an abusive partner. But as you'll hear from the panelists today, even for women who have won their freedom, our legal system still refuses to acknowledge that they are innocent for having defended themselves. As a program, we are trying to build on the incredible work of those who came before us, those who have always centered criminalized survivors. Society at large has not, and neither has the mainstream domestic violence community or advocates for criminal legal reform. We're here today because even though we're still a young program, we hope that the Women's Prison Project can grow into a model that can be replicated elsewhere. Our teams of lawyers and students represent clients in both civil and criminal litigation, and our student attorneys represent clients who are sometimes labeled victims and sometimes labeled defendants in the criminal legal system. And these experiences challenge us all to break down entrenched perspectives about who is a victim, who is a defendant, and who should we care about? For many of the women that we work with, the difference between a victim and a defendant is one single tragic moment in time. Pedagogical standpoint, this clinic design introduces a new generation of lawyers to a really complex combination of problems around intimate partner violence, community violence, policing, childhood trauma, gender inequity, racism, poverty, mass incarceration. You really can't, I'm not sure you could find a forum that mixes everything up in the same way that we are able to do in dealing with these types of cases. We represent clients in every stage of litigation, pretrial, post-conviction, clemency, parole, and we have clients in urban and rural parishes throughout the state of Louisiana. And because we were able to combine the resources of the domestic violence clinic and the criminal justice clinic, we have been able to assemble a rare combination of expertise in both intimate partner violence and criminal defense, which we have found is just invaluable for doing this kind of work. We realize there's limits to what we can do after wrongful convictions happen. So we are also partnering with our former clients and with advocates around the state to educate stakeholders and build momentum to support the decarceration of survivors and the reform of law and policies that result in these wrongful convictions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that work today and also about our jailhouse lawyer project in the women's prison. It is worth noting that we are in the midst of a remarkable moment in Louisiana right now, in the sense that more women than ever are coming home under our governor's leadership through clemency. But we need change that can survive political wins. And so those are the long-term goals that we are going to always have at front of mind. And finally, I just want to take a minute before we begin to acknowledge somebody that everybody on the panel probably knows, Bobby Jean Johnson. In 2007, Bobby Jean was one of Louisiana's longest serving incarcerated women. She spent her entire adult life, 41 years, in prison. I played only a small role in Bobby Jean's legal case, but she played a huge role in the lives of other women. Bobby Jean died shortly after gaining her freedom, but not before telling me stories about other incarcerated women and insisting over and over again that something be done to help them. Bobby Jean gave us a call to action, and this project is part of her legacy.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Mattis. I am co-director also of the Women's Prison Project. And I have the great honor of introducing to you all the members of, as the dean so appropriately described, a really incredibly talented team, WPP team. So I want to make some introductions. First, I'd like to, many of these people you will see, and I apologize to the people on Zoom, but you may not be able to see some of the folks who are in the audience, but I want to introduce them in addition to. So we've already met and heard from Kasana Duran. Kasana is our Director of Strategic Initiatives. Tim McAvoy, Tim, who's over here in the corner. Tim is our lead attorney for all our civil legal services with the WPP program. Our criminal legal services are led by our two attorneys, Stas Moros and Carlotta Leppingwell, who will be on the second panel today, along with our in-house investigator, Emily Beasley. Emily is over here. Thank you. Also here today is Catherine Pusateri. Where's Catherine? She stepped out, of course. Catherine Pusateri, who is our paralegal, and she also works as our client and family liaison. For our fourth panel, we're going to be hearing from Hannah Grodell. Hannah is our Emil Gumpert Access to Justice Fellow, and she's doing our work with the Women's Prison Project, assisting and training our counsel substitutes, which are a lot of folks know as sort of jailhouse lawyers. And with her, I'd like to introduce Everett Ofrey, who also is a consultant on that project, and Candace Malone, who's also on that team working to assist with that work on counsel sub-trainings and assistance. I want to also acknowledge the work, another team member who couldn't be here today. She was going to be on our third panel, Imani Richardson, who is our law and policy advocate, and she was going to join us for our third panel, but unfortunately she's sick today. So hopefully maybe she's watching, and we miss you here, Imani. Get better soon. Lastly, I think the dean already introduced three of our panelists, clients, Women's Prison Project clients who are going to be talking with us, but I also wanted to acknowledge one other Women's Prison Project client who is here with us today, Ms. Adosha Robinson, who has been home since November. I'm sure that everyone is tired of all the introductions, and we want to hear from the folks who are here to share their stories with us today. So thank you so much for being here.
All right, so I think we're going to start our client panel now. Thank you so much for joining us today and being willing to share about your stories and your experiences. I would like to just start by asking you each to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you're from, and why you decided to join our panel today.
Start. Hi, everyone. My name is Candace Malone. I am from Northern Louisiana in a small town called Homer, which is near Shreveport. I am a first-time mom to a beautiful 11-month-old baby girl. And the reason that I am here today is because I would love to have some input into the things that go on and possibly make a difference for the women that are still incarcerated. I would like to share my story because I believe that my story can help plenty of women around the world, not just here in Louisiana. So that's why I'm here, and I'm grateful, and thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Sandra Starr. I'm from Monroe, Louisiana. Something about me. I just got married, starting a new life. I'm excited about that, to a wonderful man who loves me for me. I'm here today because I want the women that I left behind, the family that I left behind, to experience what I experienced, to gain their freedom as well, to meet these wonderful people that go above and beyond to help them, to use my experiences to help someone else who can't help themselves right now. So I'm just giving back any way I can to help those I left behind. Thank you.
I'm Beatrice Taylor. I go by Beezy. I'm from the Big Easy. And a lot of other places in the United States. I worked down in the CBD at One Shell Square mostly when this all happened. I was one of the first right after Sandra really to leave on clemency. I was determined that I was going to get out of that place and be the one that flew over the cuckoo's nest for the women that were there, so that I could do whatever I could do to bring them out, because that song, I've got friends in low places, it doesn't get any lower than where they are. No one belongs there just because they need to survive. And whatever needs doing, if it's just speaking, I can do that. They all stay in touch with me, they can do that, and they have pinned their hope on folks like, especially on Tulane. They're learning in the law library there. Those are my friends. They've been my roommates. They deserve a second chance, and they don't, most of them deserve to be there in the first place. So it's for them. No family is in my radar for doing for them. This doesn't concern them. This is strictly for the ladies that are back there and need to come out. They need a life. And
Thank you.
y'all are their hope. And I thank you.
So as a reference point for the people listening today, can you tell us each how long you were incarcerated and how long you've been home?
I was incarcerated for 13 and a half years, and I've been home almost 2 years this May.
I was incarcerated for 26 years. I've been home 2.5.
I was incarcerated for 23 years in LCIW, and I've been home 2.5 years.
So to ask this next question, I'm going to give the audience a little bit of background. Candace, when you went to prison, you were a college student. Sandra, you were a young single mother. And Beatrice, you were in your 40s and you had already enjoyed a successful career as a businesswoman. Each of you ended up convicted of second-degree murder, and each of you was convicted, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Can you take just a moment to share with us what you feel comfortable sharing with us about how you ended up in prison?
So to start my story, abuse for me started long before I entered into an abusive relationship with my partner at that moment. I grew up in a very abusive household. Good parents always provided for us, but they always thought that they were doing the right things and disciplining us. But however, sometimes they would take things a little too far. And growing up, I always had hopes of just getting away from there. And of course, I was in college. I was attending Grambling State University, taking the nursing program there. And I moved off campus one year and moved back home with my parents, and thinking that things would get better now that I was a little older. I was in college working toward a career. However, things did not get better. And so I met a man, and of course I confided in him all of the things that I went through growing up abused by my parents. And he assured me at that time that he thought that that was disgusting. And I had also been in an abusive relationship prior to him. And he assured me that he'd never put his hands on a woman and that that's something that he would never do. Of course, not even a month within the relationship, I found that to be a lie. I was only with him for 6 months. With us, everything escalated pretty quickly. I was isolated from my family. He moved me to his hometown, so I was surrounded by his family and his friends. And everything just escalated to the point where the day that I finally did decide to leave, this happened, and I lost my life as a college student in that time.
Thank you.
Like Candace said, abuse started early for me. I saw it in my home with my mom and my stepfather. It happened a lot. It went from my mom to me. There were times where I would I got so tired of seeing it, or my mom crying, or she's closed up in the room with bruises on her. I would always try to run to her rescue. it got to the point to where I did try to get in between both of them to stop my stepfather, but he turned it on me. So then I think that went on till I was a teenager. But watching that growing up, I vowed to not even get with anyone like that. All men looked like him to me, boys looked like men. I didn't want anyone with those actions. If you put your hand, I just didn't want to deal with that because of what I was raised up around. And I feel face first in it. I met a guy who was not abusive at first. I got so tired of, I got so tired of being at my house, I moved to get away from it. Met a guy, fell face in it. He wasn't abusive at first, but it started like a slap, a push, a shove into the wall. But I seen this at my house, so I thought it was normal. That meant he loved me. Then I was pregnant. I was all in. The abuse escalated. Wouldn't tell my family. The one friend that I had, barely told her. I tried to hide it because I was pregnant. I didn't want him to leave me alone with another child. Officer was called. That wore over me because nothing was ever done. I didn't trust him. He knew them. So I felt like, and never once did I see a woman come out to the calls that I made. It was always men. And one officer I remember had made a statement of an actual attack where I had whelps in my face from a clothes hanger. The paper, it was just a report. Nothing was done. He wasn't arrested. My continual calls, they had got so tired of me calling, they said, if you call again, we're going to arrest you both. Imagine how I felt about the next call. I didn't make it. When I did make a call, we both went to jail. Imagine how I felt. Again, abused. The more pregnancy, the abuse got worse. It went from kicking into my stomach to my face, wherever the kick landed. The only thing I could do is shield my unborn child. I would never fight back. But when I did try to fight back just once, it cost me my life. It could have been me or him. The way the incident, I could have lost my own life. Sorry. I had my daughter, beautiful daughter. She didn't learn of the truth until right when I was coming out of prison. A lot of stuff was told to her, but I felt that she needed to hear the truth from me. It was painful, but it had to be done. My family's still here. My mom's still here. I think for me, today I'm an advocate for domestic violence. I'm an advocate for the women that are left behind. Like I say, anything I can do to stop someone, some young girl from falling in love, going through abuse like I did, end up losing her life, her career. I think that's the reason of my existence. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Like I said earlier, I was working at One Shell Square and had worked all over the United States. I had a glamorous job. I took everything. To go to work, I would take either a 747 right down to a 6-passenger little Cessna. And I lived on per diem, and I put my money aside, but not for long because I bought stuff. Like, oh, I can buy a car because I did this. I did not see this coming at all. The man that this concerns was, this was what he was. This is who he was. He had been a serial batterer, convicted. His criminal history started with 4 counts of domestic violence against women, against police officers, kidnapping, fugitive from justice, failure to assist. He left someone somewhere, an assortment, and you would never know. And for a month, I only knew him 6 months. After the first month, I began calling the Gretna Police Department and having him put out. And then it would be either him talking his way back in or breaking in. It was stalking and breaking in through windows, through locks, through deadbolts, and tearing the whole frame of the house and the door down. There was no stopping him, and he would tell me, I will get to you. He was a stalker. I've since learned from professional detectives who write books that if they stalk you, they will kill you. And I was there. I was at that point when I was trapped in my kitchen after being attacked, and in trying to escape him, I stuck him with a knife and did not even know. My foot was broken. I called 911 and found out when we got back upstairs with the paramedics who came for me, because I knew my foot was broken, that he was dead that fast. Since that day, from the time they put the cuffs on you, you are their property. You're going to go the way that the law of Louisiana goes, and that is, it's a sentence to death by incarceration. There's not, the law's never changed. Sandra and I were on the Legislative Executive Committee together, and we worked for a long time on that. The law still has not changed. The law needs to change. We got out the only way we could, and that is with Tulane University. And when I was prepared to go in August, and in May, I got a application from WPP, and I filled it out real quick at night, and it got sent in the next day, and they accepted me the next day. And Sandra was already working with them. We were in the same dorm. And I had everything ready and prepared. And they picked up my work and off we went together. And so there was Becky, and there was Marcus, and there was Catherine, and there was Tim, and there was Lily, and there was Shema. I had Tulane riding gutted out old Rovers to radio DOC fans to come see me. And it was glorious. They assembled my people. So I had the priest who taught at LSU for decades. He was a chaplain there. I had half the Catholic Church and Tulane, and between those two, you pretty much, you have that support showing for you, but they put together what I'd already done in a professional manner. And it just sat that pardon board down, all the way across the board. I made it. And when Mr. Alvin Roche voted for me to have media parole eligibility credit for time served, it was like, we've done our work. And I can't say enough about the importance of what Tulane can do. They're the best law school there is. They just are, and I will tell the first year students that you can do this. You can sit women on the free side so they can help you help people get out. They're just the best. They can be the best. They can save lives. And so I speak in the Senate, and I speak in front of the governor, and I speak to the Human Trafficking Commission and the Crime Reparations Group, and they just haul me around and I speak. It's all good. We've got ladies waiting. They're worth it because they're just worth it. Thank you all.
I'm just going to interject for a moment to say, to echo something that BZ said, which they did all the hard work. And as you can see, they made it very easy for us. So thank you for the compliments, but you all did all the hard work. Okay, so next question. Candace, did you think of yourself at that time in your life as a victim of domestic violence?
So at that time, I knew exactly what I was going through, but I'd been through it my whole life, and I kind of chalked it up to being my lot in life. So I never attached the word victim to it. I just felt like this is what has been handed down to me in ways. Growing up with the abuse at home, it made me stronger. And, prior to entering a relationship with him, I gotten pregnant, and that pregnancy did not make it to the due date. And that dropped me into a depression. So I was far from the person that I'd always thought myself to be. I'd actually grown to depend on him to validate who I was. And that was one of the key points that just kind of led everything to escalate, because I completely lost myself. I couldn't do anything without him. So no, I never associated myself with being a victim. I knew what I was going through, and I knew that I wanted to get out, but I really just didn't know where I was gonna go. The option I had was to go back home and go through the abuse with my parents, which was the harder abuse for me, because this is the woman that gave birth to me and the father that has vowed to protect me. And I felt that I'd rather take it from someone that didn't know me, that didn't give birth to me. So, I dealt with that. And, of course, it got to the moment where I wanted to escape. It was Christmas, I remember, and I left, and I actually gone back to my parents' house, and I avoided him for 2 weeks. I said, if I don't talk to him, I know that I won't give in, and I know that I won't go back. So he kept calling my cell phone, kept calling my cell phone, and then he decided to call the home phone. My mom was there, and I said, Mom, do not answer the phone. And it was one of the most heartbreaking things because she answered the phone and she gave me the phone. And so once I talked to him again, I fell right back into it. So, I mean, all around, I just felt like I was part of just this hell, that this was what I would have to endure because, I mean, I don't have a family that can save me or rescue me. And it just, I never associated victim. I just associated with my lot in life, which was one of the worst lots that at the age of 20, a person could endure, especially with the stress of going to school and everything. I couldn't even say what or who I was.
A lot of people who don't work in this field think that we have criminal laws that protect victims of domestic violence. And they're confused when they hear stories like the stories that you're telling today. So can you tell people a little bit about your experience with that? What was there help? Were there resources?
There were absolutely no resources. I'm from Homer, a small town. The largest cities nearby Shreveport and Monroe. But even driving along those roads, I never once saw a billboard for a hotline to help women that deal with domestic violence. You know, growing up in a Black family in a small community, what happens at home stays at home. So you really don't want to talk about it. You know, I would go to school with having to wear shades because I would have a Black eye. I would go to work and people would notice my Black eye. I mean, and I tried calling the police. And it was just, it never felt like it helped because there was one police officer on the force that, and I rarely say his name, but his name is Terrence, that Terrence referred to as his uncle. So, you know, I assumed that that was his blood uncle, but it happened to only be a case where he was dating his aunt. And, you know, whenever I would call the police, he would come out. And the only thing that they could offer was to help assist me with packing my things and leaving to allow things to cool off or, you know, stay gone if that's what I chose. Call again, I would have obvious bruises, cuts. Nothing was ever done. The officer told me once, he said, you could file a restraining order, but that's going to cost you $100, $200. College student, I don't have $100 or $200 to file a restraining order. So I never felt like there was any hope or any help, even up until the point to where it happened. And I was sitting there in the interrogation room. Right there next to me is a man that he referred to as his uncle. So even though I'm out of the situation, again, I still didn't feel safe because I'm scared to say exactly what everything was, how Terrence actually was, because the man that he refers to as his uncle is sitting right here. And he's going to easily, once he walks out, get on the phone, call Terrence's mom and tell them everything that I've said. So I would have no defense in any of it. And prior to all of this happening, I thought we had an amazing justice system. And I thought that it was there to protect women like me. You know, my mom in the beginning begged me to go ahead and take the plea deal. But I was like, no, because like my life doesn't matter. I don't have the right to fight for my life. And so I'm just going to give it to them. I'm 20 years old. If I take a plea deal, I'll be in my 30s before I get out. I wanted to continue in my career. And so I didn't take the plea deal, and thinking that the jury, they would see the truth of the situation. But unfortunately, the police reports that I filed, my attorney failed to get those brought into, and that's another thing, you know, I got an attorney, I sought help from him. I met with the attorney 2 times. I was arrested in March. I went to trial in November. Between March and November, I met with him in his office twice. He never spoke with any of my family or my friends to try and gather who I was, what type of person I was. And I even decided myself that I would go to the YWCA to try to get counseling. And he advised me against it. He pretty much told me, just keep going to school, go back to your life, as if like everything that you've gone through, it doesn't matter. Like, continue on with your life. There's no reason for you to seek help of any kind. So no, there was never, ever any type of help that I felt like was there for me as a form of reprieve.
So we hear a lot of questions about why does she stay? Beatrice and Sandra, you were both in your own separate homes when these things happened. Can you talk a little bit about whether we should still be asking the question, why does she stay?
No, I don't think that is the appropriate question. It's why didn't he leave? Or why didn't you take him away? When I called. No, I don't think that's the appropriate question. And usually that's the question that circulates. Of course, me, myself, I stayed because I was a single mom, pregnant. Stability. I wanted to have a real family. Any means necessary. So I took it and I took it, thinking that he'd get better, hoping that he'd change. And they didn't talk about, they, like Candace said, they wasn't billboards, but to me, they had shelters, but nobody walked around saying, hey, come to where I was living. And in my time, that was a step down for a woman. I'm in my own home. I would have to go to a shelter. That they're going in the shelters now. I had 2 kids, a little baby and a son. And no one warned me about this part of my life, of this is gonna happen, or none of the officers that came out. Going to a shelter was never an option. Mom didn't go, she stayed. So remind you, I think all this is normal. So that's basically why I stayed.
So Candace touched on something I was hoping that you would all be willing to talk about a little bit, which is your experience with lawyers and your experience of being prosecuted.
It's funny you asked that question because on our way here, my husband, for the first time, I was just telling him my courtroom setting, and he was driving, and for just a quick second, it looked to me that he had stopped driving because that was his first time hearing it. My attorney, we met about 3 times, and the first time he came with a plea, he said, they want to offer you 30 years. Where in my mind, with 2 small children who've never been arrested, I'm already abused, not even knowing that that was what was going on with me, because I didn't realize I was a victim. And that's 30, I'm thinking a 23-year-old man, that's 30 years. I mean, I'm doing the math away from my kids. No. I deserve to be heard. And the second time he came, he said that, okay, Sandra, it's gonna be like you're gonna go to trial since you didn't take the 30. It's gonna be like a gamble. So when he said a gamble, you're right, thinking again. Hey, what is the gamble? The 30 years or walk? It was never explained to me. And then trial came. To me, sitting in my trial is like this. You hear anything? That's how I felt sitting in my trial. That everything was silent and it wasn't even about me. I wasn't being heard. My judge had a flight to catch. My attorney, his wife, he got a call. His wife was in labor. They both had to leave, and I'm sitting here with my life on the line that you're not even paying attention to. I tried to get my attorney to ask different questions because I didn't feel like he was. I think it was one incident, he was talking to, they was talking about, I was telling him that how he was choking me. And another demonstration is if I put my hand around your neck right now and I just start squeezing and squeezing and squeezing real tight to where you feel like you can't get that last breath, what's gonna happen? Your body's gonna react. That's what happened. And so when I was trying to explain that to him, he just brushed it off as if we're not gonna ask that, not right now. Because he's thinking about his wife in labor and the judge is telling him to hurry up because he got a flight to catch. So now I felt like, and when they sentenced me to life, no, back up. Before we walked in the courtroom, and I know that has nothing to do with it. A lot of people say you don't bring religion. I say, do you believe in God? He said, yes. But I didn't even know it myself. So later on, I found out that he was a Jew and that he really didn't care because he stated it. He didn't even see me after the trial was over. He just packed up his stuff and moved on to the next person. So it's like my life didn't even matter. I got a life sentence, move on to the next person. So, I didn't feel like he had my best interest at heart, legally. He didn't know nothing about abuse. Every time the abuse, I kept telling him about the violence, what was happening, what led up to it. It was like no one knew about it. He didn't know how to even bring it up or how to attack it.
So let me ask Beatrice about her experience in being prosecuted.
Well, as far as being victim though, I never saw myself as that. I was a very confident professional career person. I was in control of everything, thought I knew that. And so I thought I was in control of this, but I didn't know he was a career person at this. So I didn't think of myself as a victim. For 6 months, which was all I knew him, about 6 times, he was removed from the property, but he would not leave. And he would tell me, I will get to you. I flew to Memphis on a business trip. came back, he was in my house. He had people with him. You know, I was not going to leave my house because this is I pay the rent here. Why should I leave? The police are supposed to keep you from coming in. So I never thought like that. I never intended for anything to happen to him. And then everything just snowballed and it went the way it went. As for the justice system, I had an IDB attorney, Jeff Sparish. He had just finished getting his degree. He'd done a little bit of drug court. I was up against a DA who later was over the Tulane Law Clinic. Because he was.
Wow.
And he was very polished. Very polished. He commanded the floor. Whereas my little attorney was like Urkel. It was like, it was, you know, just, I wear a size petite jumpsuit, just, you know, whatever, because it was just, it was not a fit match.
So, do you all have memories of things that the prosecutor said about you?
But number one, they tainted your character. They made it like you was this mad, jealous woman that just set out that day to kill your boyfriend. I mean, no matter what you were doing in your life, like you said, I was a single mom, but I was going to night school, I was working. But in court, none of that ever came up. It was all the bad stuff.
So, what do you wish that police, prosecutors, your own attorney, or the public in general had known or understood about the experience of domestic violence survivors?
They need more training. Their training needs to be directed toward what we know to be true now. Back when, you know, this happened with me, that was not done. It wasn't looked at like that. And there was no funding for relocation. Even if I wanted to say, okay, I'll just leave the apartment, it doesn't matter, okay, I'll pay the rent, but I'll just get another place. You have to be able to move your stuff. Now the Crime Reparations Commission does have funding for you to move. I know that because I've spoken to them and I speak. And I said that if this had been available to me at that time, I would have been able to pack up my little 1-bedroom apartment, move anywhere else. And I would have never done a day in my life in jail. And this guy would have been free to do this to somebody else. And they have that money. And they're really not using it for that. Some oversight committee will take care of that. They are not, you know, they're not using, never mind. I'm not an oversight committee.
People need to be educated on domestic violence. I think they need to be educated about abuse itself, mentally, physically. I mean, I think that it shouldn't be just go to a shelter. I think that they should have something lined up for the woman, not, like I said, not just to be a step down going to a shelter. That's probably or especially if you have your own home. But I think more need to be done for victims so that they don't feel like victims. Realize it, but don't feel like it. But there need to be more education about abuse, awareness, be knowledgeable about it. Knowledgeable about what abuse is and the effects and how to help them.
And one thing I also want to say, like for attorneys, talk to your clients, get to know them. Don't just talk to them about the case. Talk to them about their life before the abuse. Because once they're able to talk with you about who they were or who they are, then they're able to trust you. They're able to remember things that they feel comfortable. That's one thing I can say about Stas and Carlotta and Emily. When they spoke with me while I was still incarcerated, they didn't just speak about my case. They asked me about the things that I like to do in prison. And that was a shocker for me because I didn't have that experience with any other attorney. I mean, other than the one that I did have, Michael J. Rocks, a brilliant attorney. He did write my post-conviction relief that helped to get me out of prison. But having them speak to me and get to know who I was as a person really allowed for me to be able to entrust them and remember things that I didn't even remember when I was going to trial. So definitely talk to your clients and get to know them. And don't just make it okay, this is my client, this is a case. I'm gonna try to get you out of prison. I'm gonna try to stop you from going to prison. And if it works out, great, have a nice life. Or if it doesn't, okay, fine, you're going to prison, sorry. But even with them, they still contact me. They ask me how I'm doing because they got to know me as a person. And that is one of the greatest gifts you can give a client is to get to know who they are.
Well, especially if they are coming from with an abusive background, they have major trust issues. So like you said, you have to touch that. They're gonna have to trust you. I mean, because just saying, you're coming to help me, it's gotta be a little bit more than that. You know, these are women that have had this bottled up for so long. I mean, 27 years, almost 27 years, bottled up. Not trusting people. And then in comes someone and says, it's kind of hard. So I think once you get them to, you let them see that you're for real and that you care, like Hannah said, then the trust opens.
Can you tell us about, we'll start with Beatrice for this one. Can you tell us about your first day in prison?
I just thought about it. Imagine this. A culture shock. At trial, you can wear nice clothing. So I had, a closet full of business suits because that's how I went to work. And when I was convicted and ready to travel, I kept one. I thought, well, they say I can keep our regular clothes in there because at the time we could. And so I was transported and I walked in to the penitentiary. At that time, I think they had 1,000 women. A lot of them sitting on the grass picking clover. And I walked in a navy blue and white pinstripe suit with a light blue blouse with my name embroidered on the little flap, navy blue heels, handcuffs and shackles. And needless to say, heads turned, like maybe somebody from administration had been arrested. But culture shock. That night, we had gizzards for supper. And I looked at it and I said, I'm going to die here. I'm going to starve. Everything was culture shock. And after 23 years of it, these women became my family because I made them that, and they still are. And when I left and came out in the world in Baton Rouge, big culture shock. So That's what it was like.
For me, it was the first day in prison. I was a big TV watcher. And, so honestly, I thought what I saw on TV. When you first enter prison with your bag, you have this line of women and they're looking at you and judging you and hollering fresh meat and that's what I thought. When I walked in prison, I was scared to death. My trust was in my throat. Because I was walking into a new world with all these feelings amongst people I didn't even know with a life sentence. It was scary. I mean, I didn't know I was even gonna come out.
And my first day, everyone was telling me, oh, you're gonna love LCIW. It's like a college campus. I was like, oh, wow, so I get there and I'm like, hey, this doesn't look like any college campus I've ever seen. But other than that, I mean, I was horrified, like Sandra, an avid TV watcher. And so in my mind, I was preparing myself to have to fight every day of my life. I was definitely afraid, but I'd gone through enough, been through enough. And, if preparing for the things that I'd seen on TV, I was prepared to fight for the rest of my life until I could get to a status where, people would just leave me alone. But I went in there and for some reason, they had pegged me for a woman that had killed her child and buried the child, and the dog had dug up the bones. So none of the officers would talk to me. I would try to, where do I drop my mail off at? And they would just look in my cell and pass by. So that it was a very isolated feeling for me. But, once I did get acclimated into the environment and I met some lifers that were there, it was still one of the hardest things to wake up every day in that environment, but having the people there that I had that I could call friends and family definitely made it an easier experience.
So Candace, you did have an attorney for some of the time that you were incarcerated. Beatrice and Sandra, how many years passed after your conviction was final? How many years passed before you were ever in contact with another attorney?
Um, 25. When Tulane came,
25 years.
also that was my next attorney contact.
I had someone for my PCR. And so that, during the prescriptive period that you had to do. But after that, I decided I will file my own out of time PCR because I'm smart and I can figure out how to do this. And I actually had it prepared. And I decided that it just wasn't strong enough. It really was not strong enough. So on the way back from the law library that morning, no one was out because it was a Sunday and I'm walking back to Libra and I envisioned, you know what? I am beating a dead horse and I envisioned cutting that dead horse loose and just leaving him on the Libra sidewalk and saying, I'm just going to live my life and what comes, comes. So the next time I saw someone in a legal manner was when I saw y'all.
So each of you managed to do some pretty extraordinary things during the time that you were incarcerated and have been doing some extraordinary things since. Can you share some of that with us? Some of what you've been doing, some of the accomplishments that you're proud of?
Well, during my incarceration, I did have the opportunity to take a class with Dr. Daniel Birch to become a certified sign language interpreter. I started that program in 2010 and I kept it up until I was released. And, we still work together in making sure that I take the correct tests to get certified. I did get my paralegal certification through Blackstone Institute while incarcerated. And I also started going to school with the Tulane School of Professional Advancement through Operation Restoration in 2018. And they have been gracious enough to allow me to continue my education in that upon my release. I'm studying social sciences in hopes to one day try to put that degree toward being a teacher to help the youth before they get to our stages in life, to where they have to face this, to kind of put them on the correct path in life and to be that fallback in case they do run into anything. And so I do a lot of domestic violence advocacy, working with IPEJ, NAACP. Those are just a few of the things that I do, and I'm proud of them. And of course, my biggest accomplishment is being a mom. I always had dreams of being a mother, and while I was incarcerated, I thought that that dream would never come true, but thanks to the Women's Prison Project, my daughter was able to become a reality.
All of that one, Candace, the baby. I think the biggest what I did was I went to the educational class, domestic violence class that they offered. From the educational class, I went to the leadership class to mentoring the classes myself. Because to me, that was important when I found out that I was actually not a victim, but a survivor. So I wondered how many other women were in prison like that. I also achieved my associate's and my bachelor's in theology for BTS. And that led me to oversee a reentry workforce program inside the prison at LCIW, which they never thought would happen. I worked with some wonderful mentors that what we did, we had 4 parishes that we dealt with, 4 different judges, and they would court order women that were going down the wrong path to our workforce for 6 months to a year. And then after that time, if they completed the program successfully, we would order them back to the judge to be resentenced. So to help someone else, I think whether it was an elderly person or whether it was a young girl in prison, I was right there because I knew in my mind that if I helped the elderly, somebody was gonna look out for my mom. If I helped the younger women that were in the prison when they were going astray, to help them get back on the right path, somebody was gonna be there for my daughter. So that was my motivation. And the things that I really enjoyed was working with the reentry for workforce, because in there, they had women that come through that were dealing with domestic violence. They had women with all type of issues. And I think it was rewarding to see them go back to be resentenced, to be released. So I felt like each time somebody left, they took a little bit of me with them, if that makes sense. Even though I was still confined, it was rewarding for me to help somebody else get out.
And to interject and to toot the horn for Sandra. Sandra is a great liturgical dancer, and she actually started a program at the prison for younger women and older women, because I remember Miss Mary Black was a part of it.
I don't know.
And so she definitely taught us some of those great spiritual dances, and it definitely made the environment one of a more somber pace. And I'll never forget my experiences with learning under her as a liturgical dancer.
When I was released from prison and ended up, the first place I was that was free was at Starbucks. And I told Stas, use me, 2 words. And he did not miss a beat because I was sincere and he picked up on it. And you don't leave money on the table. And so I've been, when he calls and he's got something in mind, write a judge or a letter for someone who's going to clemency. And so that must be a need. And it occurred to me that how hard it was for me to get support letters, because you've got to contact everybody and say, I need a support letter to go to the board. This is what you write. That's your average person doesn't do that out in the free world. They don't have someone in jail to write it. And how do I format it? And what do I have to do? So I put together a formatted email that I can send them. I'll get the person in prison to send me a list of contact phone numbers. Those people can send me their email address. I get to know them a little bit, and I send them this formatted email so they can expound upon how they know this person, and it can go straight to the pardon board, and the pardon board will say, thank you for your support letter. Have a nice day. And it's in the permanent docket. It's real. I mean, right there waiting. Or at the bottom, if you don't want to do email, you can write to the Louisiana Board of Pardons in the Capitol, and here's how you do that. So,
Becky, Beezy was the dean in the you didn't want to tell it, I'm gonna tell it. She was the dean in the prison library, prison chapel library. When you come to the chapel and you open that door, the first face you see is Beezy. She's like the guard of the books. And I felt that she did it so well that she didn't discriminate in the chapel where it came to needing material. She knew it. Assisting a seminary student, she knew it. And at times I'm like, Beezy, did you read all those books? So I'm just gonna say that I'm proud that, and some of the times I'm like, Beezy, just give me a book, but she wouldn't deviate. So I think that I'm proud that it was somebody like you there. Even though I got on your nerves.
2 books, 2 days.
See? 2 books, 2 days, you heard her? So I'm proud that it was somebody like you that cared.
And I did read the books and mark them with a God bless you bookmark. I didn't do your research, but I can mark that spot.
So I wanna, so we're gonna have to wrap up, but I wanna leave just a moment at the end for whoever would like to speak to this issue, which is, what do you want the people here listening today to know about the women at LCIW? That's the women's prison.
What do we want?
What do
them
you
to
want?
know?
What do you want the people who are listening to know about the women who are in prison? Who are still there?
They have no direction.
They have no hope right now. It's draining. When you don't know, especially if you have a life sentence, you don't know when that door is going to open for you. You don't have the resources to help yourself. That's where I was. I was so desperate to where I went to the library, law library, and tried to learn it all myself to help myself. Even that was frustrating when you don't know the law. So they have women in that's still there. They don't even have the up-to-date books to help themselves. They have no resources, no guidance of where to go, how to even file something. They don't have anyone there to actually stop and say, your life matter. They don't have that. They don't have it. So imagine just walking around in a circle all day, every day, with a life sentence over your head, going eat, do your job, come home, come back to your bed. Routine every day. All you have is just a little bit of light that's saying maybe one day until that day actually come, if it comes. Somebody care enough to come. So they need assistance, they need help, legal help. They need somebody just to visit them to wanna help themselves.
Thank you. So I want to thank you all so very much for sharing your stories and making yourself vulnerable. And we understand the vulnerability and the sensitivities about what you've shared. There was a reference at one point during the panel to the faith of a particular attorney, and it's not clear what the relevance or meaning of that was in terms of what was attached to it. But for the record, I do want to say that I think we can all agree that a person's faith has no bearing on the relevance of their qualifications as an advocate. And certainly there have been many heroic attorneys of all faiths fighting injustices, and many attorneys of all faiths who have failed our clients. And so I just did want to mention that. Again, your stories are extraordinary. And actually, I wish they were more extraordinary, quite frankly. I wish there were not as many of these stories to be told, but we're so profoundly grateful to the three of you for sharing what you shared today.
And you know we are. Roll wave.
I'm gonna take a moment to switch to the next panel and just maybe reflect, take some notes. We wanted to send up, a word cloud of your reactions and comments you want to share for our panel. Hi, everybody on the virtual line. We're just gonna take a few minutes to transition to the next panel. Please take a moment just to document any reflections you have. If you want to send some encouraging words in the chat to Sandra, BZ, and Candace, we would appreciate that. And if there's that Mentimeter, we want to share a word cloud of your reactions to this first panel. Thank you. Not so much. Thank you for all our virtual participants for your patience. I just wanted to say, we're talking about really difficult topics. So please take care of yourselves in the best way you know how. If anything comes up for you, hearing about anything here today. But thank you for sharing your words of encouragement and your responses. And now we have our second panel on the legal aspects of the program. So I'm going to turn it over to Candace Malone.
Hello again, everyone. So like Cassandra said, this next panel will be about the legal strategy for criminalized survivors. And we have a team of great people up here, 3 of whom I met and 2 of whom I have not. However, I would like for each of you to introduce yourself. And if you could just share a little bit about how you got into your profession.
I'm Emily. I'm a staff investigator with the Women's Prison Project. I got lucky years ago, and once I learned that this field was an option, I just kind of fell into it. Started working at the Public Defender's Office in New Orleans. Was there for several years, and at some point was like, maybe I'll go to law school, but just really fell in love with this particular part of the work. And so I've just been doing it ever since.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stas Moroz. I'm a clinical assistant professor with the Women's Prison Project. When I went to law school, I wasn't super sure what I wanted to do. But I spent a couple summers in Louisiana doing criminal defense, and I saw some aspects of the criminal legal system that just struck me as incredibly unfair. So I then moved down here to be a public defender, and I did that for 6 years, and then I joined the Women's Prison Project a few years ago.
Hi, I'm Carlotta Leppingwell. I'm the other clinical assistant professor along with Stas with the Women's Prison Project. I also didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in law school, but I had the honor of being a part of the first internship class at the Orleans Public Defender's Office post-Katrina, which really shaped the rest of my career. After working at the Public Defender's Office, after law school, I became a capital defense post-conviction lawyer in Texas, where I really got to understand how trauma impacts our clients' lives, and so got to know so many people who were serving death sentence, really ultimately because of the life that they had lived prior to their crime. And so when I heard about the Women's Prison Project, it really appealed to me as being an amazing intersection of the work that I had been doing and for the work that I wanted to be doing here in Louisiana. And so I had the honor of joining this team.
My name is Rebecca Goldstein. I'm a student attorney with the Criminal Justice Clinic, working with the Women's Prison Project. And before law school, I did some volunteering with, a rape crisis center. And I think that was sort of what focused my interest and what made me really excited about the Women's Prison Project. And since law school, I've definitely similarly seen a lot of issues with the criminal legal system and wanting to work within that intersection. And that's been really awesome with the Women's Prison Project.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Angela Beam, and like Rebecca, I'm a third-year law student here at Tulane, working in the Criminal Justice Clinic, and through the Women's Prison Project as well. I came to law school to be a public defender after having the opportunity to intern with offices that did that work during college and working with similar organizations before law school. I'm from Texas and knew I wanted to stay in the South, which kind of initially it made me interested in Tulane, but then honestly reading about the Women's Prison Project, which had started around that time too, was one of the things that brought me here. So it's really exciting to be a full circle and working with the project at this point.
Thank you all so much for those lovely introductions, and it's nice to meet you, Ms. Goldstein and Ms. Beam. Okay, so I am going to ask a few questions, and then we will open the floor for questions from the audience. So please be thinking about what you would like to ask as they're answering these questions. You can answer it in any order you'd like. So for the first question that I'd like for each of you to answer, what are some of the things that you find goes wrong in the cases that you've dealt with?
I can go first. I think this was a clear theme from our panelists earlier, that stereotypes about who survivors and victims of intimate partner violence are, how they should be, what they should do, what they should say, what they should look like, infiltrate every aspect of the legal system from arrest through conviction. We see this in practice with police practices. We heard Ms. Starr talk about the fear of dual arrests. That is a very real thing. Women who fight back in self-defense are arrested as well as their abusers. We see that police have no training in trauma-informed interviewing, that they do not understand why women do not remember every single detail of what happened to them in the most traumatic moment of their life when they were defending themselves. And we see how they make assumptions about victims of domestic violence. As I said before, how they should act, what they should look like, who they should be, why they should have left, why they should have called the police before, and why it's imperceivable to them that the system would have failed these women previously. Then we see prosecutors continue to perpetrate those stereotypes. We see them treat our clients unlike the victims that they claim they are there to represent. We see them treat our clients like criminals. We see them not believe that they were survivors who were defending themselves. We see them use the same stereotypes over and over again in trial, in how they talk about our clients and how they treat our clients. And then we see defense lawyers who, because of these stereotypes that are so pervasive in our society, treat their clients the same way. They do not come to these cases from a perspective of believing, or if they do come to these cases from a perspective of believing, they don't have the resources to adequately represent our clients because they are completely overburdened by our system. And so they don't know how to investigate these cases adequately in order to effectively represent their clients. And they don't know how to rebut the stereotypes that are being perpetrated by prosecutors.
Yeah, that was a very comprehensive answer, Carlotta. I think kind of one way I've been thinking about this also is what we see in our cases is the convergence of the, tolerance of gender-based violence and the misogyny that we see in society in our legal system. And then that's all combined with all the unfairness we see to people accused of crimes, right? So, Beezy, if I may use, she said use me. I didn't. Oh no, Beezy. Oh, Beezy, I'm sorry. Well, Beezy, if I may use something from your case as an example, the foreperson of Beezy's jury. So that was the person who was leading deliberations when they were deciding on her case during jury selection said, a nagging wife, you could justify slugging her just once, right? That's when the defense attorney was doing jury selection and trying to see if any of the jurors had stereotypes about domestic violence or what they thought about domestic violence. So that all, of course, was a huge part of why she was wrongfully convicted. But then all the things that people accused of crimes generally have to deal with, there was a synergy there, right? So in Louisiana, we had non-unanimous jury verdicts. Beezy had an attorney that was appointed but didn't have the resources necessary to actually conduct and adequately represent her, to meet with her the amount of times that he needed to meet with her, to hire an investigator to do all the research to find out about his long history of gender-based violence, right? There's the prosecution not disclosing evidence that would have been relevant that they had an obligation to disclose. So I think that's kind of one, important thing about our program is we merge advocates from two different worlds, right? Sometimes there's a sort of artificial divide between victim advocacy and criminal defense, and we reject that binary And we think that making the criminal legal system, more fair and advocating for victims goes hand in hand.
I think another really clear example was present in the case that I've had the privilege to work on throughout this year. In the case that I'm working on, our client was convicted of second-degree murder for killing her abusive partner. And in her trial, she was represented by a civil attorney who had never tried a murder case before and had very little criminal experience, and did not know anything about intimate partner violence and didn't consult anyone who might have. So as a result, this narrative was completely absent from our client's trial. The jury heard none of it, and her story was incredibly distorted, and she was convicted, I think, as a direct result. And it's just been it's been striking to see all of those errors and the impact, of course, they've made in our client's life. And a few years ago, the law slightly changed when the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled in the case Curley, which essentially said that trial counsel can be ineffective under Strickland if they fail to consult an expert in intimate partner violence where that's present in the case. And so it's a recent case, I believe it was 2018 when it came out. So the impact of that decision is yet to fully be seen. But one initial impact was in our client's case where we were able to have an evidentiary hearing under this case. I think to our knowledge, it was the first evidentiary hearing in the state of Louisiana based on Curley. And it's incredible to see as well.
Thank you all so much. Those are some very good answers. And so for our next question, I'm sure that each case is different and you all have formulated a strategy that you'd like to approach cases. But what are some of the creative strategies you have tried for your clients?
So something that we're working on right now with one of our clients is she had gotten a life without parole sentence initially. And then her sentence was commutated to 99 years with parole. And right before Christmas, she had her parole hearing and she was able to come home, which was really exciting. And now what we're trying to do is pursue we're having a Harris hearing for her. And so something that's a little unique about it is that she is, out of prison on parole, but we're trying to get her sentence reduced. And so we're going to have an ineffective assistance at counsel at sentencing claim to try to get a downward departure from her initial mandatory minimum sentencing. So I think that that's something that's really unique about this program is one, having the capacity to sort of follow that through, but also that it's something that hasn't yet been done. There hasn't been a downward departure on a murder charge in Louisiana yet. So just finding more avenues where we can start to see how to find, some solutions.
So another thing we've been doing is using our whole team's expertise. So we have Stas and myself and Emily who come from a criminal defense background, and then we have team members like Professor Konkar who come from an intimate partner violence background. And we've been trying to collaborate and use our expertise as a team in order to approach district attorneys' offices in negotiation. The reality is that when I come to the door on my own as a criminal defense lawyer, they looked at me with some skepticism, whereas the people that have been practicing in the intimate partner violence world and community for longer have more sway with the district attorney's office. And so Professor Konkar and I have done that in a pretrial case where we then were able to convince the district attorney that there were some real issues in our client's case, and they allowed us to put on through them an entire presentation to the grand jury. So by having convinced the district attorney that there was a real issue, a real possibility of domestic violence in this case, and the self-defense in a situation where our client was in all likelihood going to die, they were like, look, we're not going to dismiss this case, but we'll put on your full defense before the grand jury. And the grand jury entered a no bill and our client walked free. And this is using creative strategies, like combining our expertise and then using my prior practice in New York, where we had a very active grand jury practice, to achieve this amazing outcome in a rural community here in Louisiana.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as far as investigation is concerned, we do a lot of brainstorming about both with witnesses and with records. We're very fortunate that we have the resources and the space, the time to, sort of build this, look everywhere we can for like context. And I think kind of going back to, not to go back to our last question about what sort of goes wrong sometimes in these cases. We talk a lot about how, what you see in police reports and, on paper about cases, and often, a client's own attorneys, their own investigation is so limited to, the night of the incident, or this, these particular sort of things that are checked off a box, running, the decedent's criminal record, and that's it, and not looking or for like prior incidents of abuse, or like really understanding like the whole context of a situation. And so we get to do a lot of like brainstorming on like, ways to get information that we know exists through public records and through witness interviews. And so it's really like great to be able to, figure out ways to like draft public records requests to various agencies, where to look for records, things like that.
Yeah, I think I would just add, I think one thing we're doing right now, and I don't know how it's going to turn out, right? Because a lot of the strategies we're trying are new, but there are some things that we're doing that should be obvious, but I think aren't. And there are some laws that on their face should apply to our clients, but because of the way people, because of just basically gender bias and how laws are applied and thought of, they aren't. So just when we try to change that. So I'll give a couple examples. One is a large number or percentage of our cases are stand your ground cases or castle doctrine cases. Our clients defend themselves in their own homes. And we just don't see anyone bring that up at trial. Not the defense attorneys, not the prosecutors, not the police. And really, when you read the laws in Louisiana that allow you to use force to expel someone from your home, there's absolutely no basis for excluding DV victims in the situations that our clients are in. So we do something that should be obvious, but isn't. We say our cases are stand your ground cases. Also, there's a new factual innocence law in Louisiana, and I think a lot of people, when they hear factual innocence, they think, oh, there was DNA showing a whole other person did it. And either consciously or unconsciously, survivors who are innocent because their actions were justified are excluded from the definition of innocence. There's no rational or logical or good reason to exclude survivors who were defending themselves from our conception of innocence, yet just in the popular narrative, they are. So we are saying, no, we have filed a factual innocence claim, and we're going to continue to do so. And we're going to say that our clients are innocent because that's what they are.
I think adding to what Stas was saying, just as a good example, a lot of the clients that were on the panel today were talking about, he came into my home. And I think that just like a good example of it feeding into the gender stereotype of, I think a lot of people think of these situations as, she stayed because he had money and she was relying on his money. And like, as you heard, a lot of these women, it's their home. And so maybe the lawyer's not even asking or thinking about it in that way as a stand your ground. So I just feel like that was a good example.
And thank you all so much. I do know that your clients are definitely blessed to have you working on their teams. Okay, and so for our last question, what factors have made it possible to have some success with some of your cases?
Always
We'll go again. I've already touched on this, but the combination of experience has really been instrumental for us. In terms of the success that we've had most recently in the hearing that Angela was talking about, we haven't won the case yet, knock on wood, but it was a very powerful presentation because we were combining the knowledge of some of our team members with regards to intimate partner violence and our other expertise in criminal defense in our consultation with experts in intimate partner violence and in our investigation. If we hadn't come together to share that knowledge, I, as a criminal defense lawyer, would not have understood how so many of my clients' actions were reactions to the situation that they were in. And I would say that if just somebody that normally practices civil law is coming to this work without having an investigator like Emily Beasley, who really knows the ins and outs of how to find witnesses, what kind of witnesses are out there, what records are out there, we wouldn't have been able to get a full packet and like a full story and all of the evidence that we needed to provide to our expert. And so combining all of that together has really been instrumental in the potential success of our cases.
And I would second that as from, my perspective as an investigator, it's truly been incredible to learn so much from, people who are so knowledgeable about intimate partner violence and how, that has informed like where we look when we are like gathering, context and just building out, like trying to understand like a situation that's always way more complicated and, nuanced. And yeah, just, complex than what is the narrative that's, put forth by the police or by prosecutors. And I think that I wouldn't, without the team that we have with these, these various perspectives and knowledge, like have known about, like as Carlotta was saying, all of the sort of like places that you can see a lot of the abuse and trauma and like where to look for witnesses and records and things like that. And in our practice, I think in criminal defense, like typically, especially in capital cases, there's this pretty clear like division between fact investigators and mitigation investigators. And I felt for a long time, that I actually don't think that fact investigation really should be that different from mitigation investigation as far as what strategies you're using to talk to people, to contextualize things, to understand a case, and this project was like the dream, to be able to work in a context where that type of sort of hybrid investigation where we're looking at facts, but there, we don't separate those from social history, from these other like things that are related to trauma and kind of, the more like emotional side of things that we usually, I think, often separate into two separate categories of work. And so, yeah, that's, I think, been really effective.
Yeah, Carlotta just wrote me a really important note, so I'm going to say what she suggested, which makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that I think we haven't talked as much about today is we consult with other attorneys all across Louisiana, and we consult with public defenders' offices. That's who's going to be doing the vast majority of these cases. They are far too common for a small program like us to represent all the criminalized survivors in Louisiana, unfortunately. So we have had some success just, doing things like talking through the dynamics of abuse with other attorneys, connecting them with experts who we've developed relationships with, and helping them, have the tools to effectively advocate for their clients. Also, I'll say, and I'm sure I speak for everyone on the panel, the number one reason that our clients have been able to get out are our clients and all of their accomplishments. And they, you know, we've done, a lot of the work we've done has been through clemency and the parole processes. And our clients have done such incredible things given such really, really difficult circumstances. And it's just it's a privilege to be able to showcase everything they've done. And I think you heard a lot about some of their accomplishments earlier today.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and open the floor for questions from the audience.
Thank you, all of you. It's very, very impressive. Kind of following up a little bit on what Stas just talked about, which is the spreading the word to the defense bar. I'd like to ask the students on the panel to what extent they think that the word is being spread here within law school to future lawyers who, most of whom will not do the kind of work that you are doing, but may well need to be educated about the issues in the extreme complexity of the kind of cases that you all work on.
Sure. I think that's so important. I think that through various other extracurriculars I'm involved with, I've spoken a lot with students who are in earlier class years than I am about the Women's Prison Project's work. And I know that a lot of them are really excited about it. I think a new group of student attorneys have just been selected for next year. So it's really exciting to see the legacy continue in that way. I really hope that we can continue talking about the work with other students. I know a lot of people who are currently doing it are kind of dead set on doing that work specifically. And I'd like to see other classmates who might not be quite as public interest minded be engaged in the work as well. But it's truly been an incredible experience. It's like a hallmark of my time at Tulane. It certainly feels like the most important thing I've done while I've been here, if not in my life more broadly. It's just like the perfect meeting of everything that we've done in law school, from courses or other extracurriculars. And it just feels like a really immense privilege to have the opportunity to learn from the experience and to help with these cases.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment as well. I think, especially within the like clinic community, I think everyone gets really excited, and you sort of share that experience with your friends and fellow students that are in clinic. And I think that becomes, but I think it can be a little bit of that bubble. And so I do think it would be really important to sort of, as Angela said, invite more people in, because I do think the majority of students aren't necessarily in this one niche area or even necessarily like criminal law at all. And so I think that is important. And yeah, I think it's also just, I think it has been such a highlight of the law school experience. And I think that even just before doing it, if I'd known a little bit more about the extent of it, I think that would have made me excited as well. So yeah.
Wanted to say thank you for everything that you all are doing. And there's a couple of questions that are coming up through the chat. So I don't know if you can see them, but I'll read them right now for you. One of them is, are there similar clinics at other law schools, and how do you consult with other law schools about starting similar clinics? What funding or other roadblocks might there be to beginning such clinics? And maybe
I feel like Professor Ponkar should come up to answer some of these questions.
Well, I'll ask the next one, and maybe in that time that he can come down, or somebody else can answer that question. But what is the process by which you select which clients and what cases to take on?
Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit to that. First of all, it's very hard. I hate it. It's like one of the least enjoyable parts of this. I think at least all three of us, we all come from a public defense perspective. So the way we took on cases was you represent everyone, no matter what. That's what you are. You're a lawyer, you're an advocate, figure it out. Everyone has a story to tell. So I don't, it's, really unfortunate that we don't have the resource, that we don't have the resources to be able to just represent everyone, because there's no right to a post-conviction attorney in Louisiana or under federal constitutional law. And so that is extraordinarily unfair, because you can't make a lot of legal claims until you get to that stage. Currently, I think, most of the clients you represented have been women who are incarcerated because they defended themselves against an abusive partner. And, we look at, who applies first. We look at if there's a realistic possibility that we can do something in the near future. We look at issues that are time sensitive, right? Like if there's a certain either deadline in the law or something like that where we can actually intervene and be helpful. But the statistics show that the vast majority of women who are in prison are survivors of gender-based violence. And we don't think that that only applies or is meaningful for people who defended themselves against their abusive partner. And that's the specific reason they were convicted. So I think ideally we want to be able to provide services to people whose connection to criminalization doesn't have to be like that direct.
There's another question about funding. I do have a question personally, and maybe then we can step into the funding question if you want to address that issue, which is so important for this work. So we are with the Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence. And one of the things that we are charged with as a commission is to increase access to justice for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking by mobilizing the legal profession. So one of the things that we do is we pass policies internally as an organization, that the biggest lawyer organization in this country. I want to ask from you, what do you need from the legal profession? What should we be focusing on? I think we are sitting here and I'm taking notes, thinking there's systemic issues, there's policy issues, but I really want to hear from the folks on the ground. Like, what is the most important thing that we need to be doing as a profession?
Rolanda always gives me really good prompts. Yeah, I mean, I think just from our perspective, we need to bridge whatever gaps there have historically been between decarceration and criminal defense and victim advocacy. And we need to put an end to, prisons being the primary way of dealing with trauma. And so that's like, that's a lot of stuff to say that. And I feel like there's some momentum towards that, right? I think now we have this adversarial system and it pits people up against each other, but we would all be a lot safer and people would be able to live more fulfilling lives if we didn't do that.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you. What about funding? What do we need? I'm not sure who's going to listen to this, but yeah. So I would say, let me answer the question directly, because that's what I always tell my students to do when they're in court. We have good resources. How do we achieve funding?
Betty, are there other similar clinics at other law schools?
Yeah, I think so. So there are other clinical programs at other law schools. I mean, historically, there's been, quite a few programs at law schools that provide civil legal services, which is how we started. I mean, the domestic violence clinic, we've been providing civil legal services to survivors, for a long time. And so this is actually just a transition, right? Of like bringing in additional expertise, right? Like we're still doing those services. We're still, which I see as profoundly important for helping give survivors an alternative to criminal legal systems that aren't working for them, right? And to help them get to really give them that alternative. But yeah, so this just added to that, right? And I don't know that there are a lot of programs that are doing the mix of both. And I know that there are programs where people have experience doing a little bit of both, but I don't know. I mean, I do think the combination of expertise on this team is like very specific and enables us to do things that are not ordinary in terms of the types of advocacy that we can provide for our clients. In terms of, funding issues, I mean, I like how everybody on my team turned to me when that. So we have been incredibly fortunate to have received a gift of seed money that allowed us to put together this incredible team. And I think you guys in this panel are getting a sense of how incredible the team actually is. And to not just like hire a lawyer who could do post-conviction, but to give us the resources that are allowing us to do it the way it needs to be done. I mean, having a full-time in-house investigator, right? Having lawyers, criminal defense lawyers with different expertise, even, among each other. And so I do think, I mean, it's quite unusual, obviously, and we have benefited tremendously from the generosity of people who care, right? And that initial seed money has been huge. And in addition, we have there are people who care who are helping to support this work. And since that initial seed money. And so it is difficult, right? Because it's not that easy for a university to sustain a program that's so well resourced. But I think of this all the time, and how much money was it worth that Sandra came home and that BZ came home and that Candace came home? It's worth it. And people need to care.
My name is Carla. I'm part of the commission as well, and I'm from New York Sanctuary of the Family. I have a couple of questions. I'll ask them all now, so try to remember. So one, there was a lot of mention about parole hearings. So what is the length that the people are on parole? Is it the rest of their sentence? And I do know that at least in New York, parole, there's usually an admission of guilt. And is that part of what you have to do when going in front of the parole board? And one of my other questions is, non-jury trials an issue? And do you think that litigants or survivors would fare better if it was a non-jury trial?
I think I could speak to the first question. Maybe I'll hand off the second question to someone else. So most of our clients who have been able to go up for parole first had to have their sentences commuted by the governor. And typically the practice in Louisiana is, so we have our statute, our second-degree murder statute mandates life without parole sentences unless the judge finds that that is unconstitutional in a given circumstance. We're one of 2 states that has that. Typically the pardon board would recommend a commutation to 99 years with parole eligibility, either immediately or after 25 years, after 30 years, they'll pick a number. And then if that's granted, if the governor signs that, they'll go up for parole, and then our clients will be on parole for the remainder of that 99-year sentence. Like Rebecca said, we're trying to litigate that right now, and we're trying to get, empower judges to say, no, that makes no sense, that you have to be on parole till you're like 140, or something like that. Sorry, was there a second part of the parole question? I just wrote parole down on my thing. Or Rebecca, go for it, yeah.
So admitting guilt is that is required for parole. And it's like one of the biggest things that the board looks for is, is this client accepting responsibility? And so I think that's one of the hardest things in these types of cases with going to parole is, having somebody that shouldn't have to be sorry for what they did. Self-defense something that should have been seen as legal, that is legal, and then have to, stand in front of a board and recount their trauma and then, have to take accountability for that. And so I think that's also where, just trying to tell the board without telling the board all the reasons that they should see it as self-defense and justifiable, while having your client take accountability and then making sure that they also know that, like, we don't think they should feel that way. And I think that's something that's really tough. Yeah.
But that's such an important structural issue with the way parole works, and why parole and clemency can never be the only solution to the wrongful incarceration and convictions of survivors. And that's why there's been a few states that have done legislation, like New York had the Survivor Justice Act, I might have said the name of the act wrong, but New York had legislation to provide a post-conviction remedy so people don't have to only rely on the pardon and parole process.
I think the last question was about whether we've seen judge trials as being an issue. So the only experience that I know of with a judge trial is Katina Curley, who the case that we mentioned earlier, who has led to this really excellent case. And she's now on the national list of exonerees. Excellent case that says that at trial, in a case like this, in order to be effective, a defense attorney needs to consult with and present an expert in intimate partner violence. She went to trial in front of a jury and lost. And then when her conviction was reversed for ineffective assistance of counsel, she was retried in front of a judge, and that judge acquitted her. However, that was the same judge that found that her lawyer was ineffective and found that it was going to prejudice her to not have this evidence presented. The same issues that we see with jurors exist with judges. They carry the same biases towards our clients. So I think you have to treat the audience similarly. And unfortunately, in Louisiana, all our judges are elected. And with that comes additional concerns about pleasing the public that you might not have in a state like New York. We don't have any personal experience with doing these cases in front of judges, but I guess other than to see how they treat our clients in post-conviction, which can be varied, some understand and some don't.
Hi, I'm also on the commission, and one of the areas in which I work is the intersections of gender violence and immigration. And so I'm curious if you have run into cases where, if you have somebody released from prison or jail, whether you've had to then also manage the immigration consequences of their conviction. Hopefully no longer conviction. Curious if that is an area of learning that you focus on.
I actually don't think our team has. I think that is definitely something that we need to be aware of. I think in terms of the cases we've had, there just aren't as many non-citizens that have applied for services. But that's a really important point. And I think it also, we always want to be vigilant to ensure that everyone has access to our services and that they're widely publicized and that we're thinking about those issues. And, we don't have any immigration attorneys on our teams, but we have worked at public defenders' offices that have consulted with immigration attorneys or have integrated them into the practice of defense.
I've been encouraged to ask one question, but I'll first ask, now I looked at Marty Carmen and I remember her question. So, anyway, so the work that we're doing, I have moved from direct services with survivors of gender-based violence, specifically immigrant survivors of gender-based violence, into a space of doing public policy advocacy at the state level and the federal level. And I'm very curious about, you talked about litigation, but I'm also curious about, is there an effort to translate all that you're learning and all that you're doing on a case-by-case basis into legislative or public policy advocacy? And what do you see potentially as the pros and potential cons of centering survivors in that work to adjust the criminal code in response to these failings of the system, when sometimes they're seen as sort of the ideal person to bring forward as the case for why we should change things, but how do we leave other people out? And how are you striking that balance? And I'm also curious, who are you working with? Who are the organizations that are doing that side of the coin of that public policy advocacy and translating all of this hopefully into systemic change? And then the last question is, this work is really a marathon. I think we all know that. I'm just curious, the work that you're doing, I'd love to hear from everyone. Just what do you do to take care of yourselves? What does self-care look like on this team? And what advice do you have for others, especially newbies who are going to enter this work? And we want you to stay in it at 100% for as long as you can, not 1,000% for a very short period of time.
I think the second question will be the subject of our next panel. So we will, I was going to say the perfect transition, but maybe we could, sorry, the first question will be the subject of our next panel, but the second question, maybe folks want to address that.
Everyone on our team is incredibly patient with me. Just as far as like self-care goes, last year yes, this work can be intense. I think, I like to obviously think about how, we're getting to do this work. We're really lucky in so many ways. But I also got pet ducks last year, and I got to hold them up on Zoom and show the students, and Stas and Carlotta were so patient with me, talking about the ducks all the time and being oh, I have to go hold the ducklings, and they would be in my lap during meetings. So that was a self-care thing that I did.
Actually, wait. Funny story.
Oh, yes.
Okay, actually, Candace, we've never told you this, so you're about to find this out. But when Emily and I went up to Homer for your case for a week, a rabbit came into our Airbnb, and Emily really wanted to adopt the rabbit, and she wanted to bring the rabbit to your hearing, and I had to tell her not to. Oh, I don't know. I need help with that. Hannah and I have been going to Pelicans games, the now struggling, formerly very successful New Orleans basketball team.
Also, Candace and I talked a lot. She would give me really good book recommendations. So that series that I can't even remember the name right now.
Nora Roberts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so just reading good, easy to read, but engaging books and things like that. It was always fun to talk about them. Yeah.
I came up in public defenders' offices that were all about working hard. And if you didn't work hard, that meant you weren't dedicated to the cause. So this is something that I've really struggled with. And I am forced to deal with by my colleagues and my students who are growing up in a different world where self-care is much more at the center of their lives, and recognizes a way to stay in this long term. And so I can't say that I'm doing a very good job of it, but I do have a daughter now who forces me to spend a lot of time with her because she's only 16 months old and she completely relies on me. And that has actually been like a really healthy perspective to have, that like when you're forced to stop doing the work, like life moves on and you can come back to it the next day with a clear mind and put a lot more work into it as opposed to being constantly stressed how I used to be. So I do think that there's something to it. And I try to get inspiration from my students who are a lot better at it.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, the sort of generational difference. Because I do think, like, I still do think it's hard, but I think it is very like top of mind of wanting to sustain yourself in this work and like seeing that it is very emotionally draining. And so I think I just try to be conscious of it, and like I let myself go home and cry and like do yoga and then like try to separate it and keep it separate. And I think for as much as they're saying with their own selves they're not good at self-care, I feel really lucky as a student because I think that they give us the space really well to do that. I know, like working under Stas, like anytime there's like, if you have space for this, or like, what is your schedule looking like this week? Or like, even we were going to visit a client one day and he's like, wait, let me check the weather first. Cause like, if it's a nice day, like we won't go that day. And just like, so like, I think they're very conscious of it, at least with us, which we appreciate. And at case rounds, we do a little meditation in the beginning and a little check-in. So I think that they are very good at helping us do it, even if they don't help themselves. So that's nice.
Yeah, I definitely think that seeing it present and top of mind here has forced me to think about how I'm doing this in my own life and really building habits out of it. Now, you know, graduating law school and continuing this work in the field as well. Something that I have specifically done that I'm certainly not doing enough of, that's been helpful, is running. Fortunately, living in New Orleans, the weather permits outdoor runs basically year round. So I found that sort of physical activity has kept me clear the most mentally and has done the most for my mental health throughout law school. But definitely something that I'm trying to remain conscious of and implement more going forward.
Yeah. This work. What do I do for self-care? Well, my daughter's almost a year old, so I'm constantly busy with her. And right now I'm maintaining a lot of different jobs, you know, to try to keep everything going and hopefully establish a more sustainable and healthy life for her. But I guess every now and then I just sit back and I watch a little television. I have a lot of series that I love to watch. Your Honor is one of the series that I'm currently watching, and I totally love it. And I'm also watching the Mayfair Witches. I am a big Anne Rice lover, love her, and the series that I'm watching is great. I just love things based in New Orleans. So to finally make it to New Orleans after my incarceration is great to be here. So yeah, I just like to sit back and watch a little TV, especially when she goes to sleep. Okay, so I would like to thank you all so much for your wonderful reflections. As a client of the Women's Prison Project, we waited so long for our crusade to come along, and we can definitely say that you are that crusade. And with the students that you're teaching, we know that we're going to have more crusaders. So let's please give them a nice big round of applause.
Anytime.
It's loud.
What do you mean?
Well, that's the screen, it's okay.
Want us to share? Yeah.
Yeah.
So for our next session, we're gonna. Great. For our next session, we're just going to combine what our two last sessions were. So we're going to be talking about the law and policy work, which I know we had some questions about before, and then we're also going to be talking about expanding access to justice. We have a couple new panelists today. So we have Mr. Ofrit and we have Hannah Grodell. Would y'all want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Hannah Grodell. I'm a Legal Access to Justice Fellow with the Women's Prison Project.
I'm Everett Ofrey, and I'm a consultant with the Women Project Manual.
Okay,
Tell
great.
you all about it.
Yes,
after
you're
class is done.
gonna hear more about it soon. So we just wanted to start with doing a brief overview of how we approach our policy work. And so our policy work includes informing, doing education and talking to stakeholders and building coalitions to make sure that legislation and policy in Louisiana is informed by all the work that we've been doing with our clients and all the research that we've been doing. And one of the main people who has been working on this is our law and policy advocate, Imani Richardson, who actually put this presentation together, but unfortunately she is sick today. So I am filling in for her with that. So we there are a few different components to this. One is, I think what we talked about in the last panel, we really try to build coalitions, especially among groups that haven't traditionally had coalitions built between them. So that can include, that includes the victim advocacy community, people who work on trafficking issues, people who work on intimate partner violence, people who have work on sexual violence issues. And then we also have, groups that do criminal justice reform, both locally and at the national level. And we've been able to collaborate between those groups to try to create a system that's more fair for criminalized survivors. We speak to statewide task forces in Louisiana. So Kasana and Becky have done that, as well as BZ has also done that, to make sure that the work that we do is informing policymakers. And like we talked about before, we challenge this thinking that you're either a victim or a defendant. You can be both, and the lines, the traditional lines that are drawn aren't a productive way for us to move forward, and they create a lot of harm. So some of the legislative policy work we've done, this is kind of a timeline. We have, organizations that we work with that work to create a legislative task force to study the criminalization of survivors. And that task force was convened in the summer of 2021. Professor Mattis, who you heard from before, was one of the co-chairs of the task force, and it resulted And it's a task force that included people from the District Attorneys Association here, from law enforcement groups, from victim advocacy groups, and kind of more traditional criminal justice reform groups. And it resulted in some recommendations. As a result of those recommendations, we had legislation that was introduced, and some of the women you heard from today actually testified in front of the legislature, and I think BZ will talk more about that. So far, I don't want to go through the whole timeline, but so far, there was a piece of legislation introduced that was voluntarily deferred, and this year the legislative session is likely to have more legislation that is going to address the issue of the criminalization of survivors. Our role as a program has been more to connect, our clients and other survivors so their voices can be heard in the process, and provide expertise based on what we've seen in our cases, based on what we studied, and models throughout the country. So it's actually really great that we're able to have this event today because we have a lot to learn from other jurisdictions. And so the task force resulted in a report, and this is just a picture of the report. And this is from the last year's legislative session. And I think BZ is going to talk about it a little more in a second. And this is, well, BZ, do you want to talk about this? Oh, if you can't see, it is a picture of you and the governor.
There's a committee called the Human Sex Trafficking Committee that is one that was formed by the First Lady. And I had spoken earlier when they were getting ready to vote. They didn't know me from anybody. And they were getting ready to vote on funding for education and medical help and advertisement for sex trafficking of children and adults. And I spoke and got a unanimous vote, just out of the blue, for the money. And so now they have in the airports all over the United States, they have billboards that children can see, a phone number they can call if they are feeling some kind of way at a bathroom or whatever. So since I got that, I was able to complete something I really wanted to do, which was to meet our governor, whose hand signed my clemency. His wife was sitting next to him. They had buried his mom the day before. We weren't sure they would show up. And I spoke about my issue, which was the clemency, and I thanked him for, but also the fact that there are still women who are waiting, who are needing his signature, or they're needing clemency. And he got up and he almost ran across the committee room and hugged me. And he heard what I said about those women needing the law and signatures. And he said that they would be getting that. And I thought that I was the only one who was hearing it. However, I was on a hot mic, and so was he. And he got up and he had the law that we were talking about, the legislation for the Senate bill that's going up, that's from Senator Regina Barrow and now co-signed by Senator Mizell. And he's read it thoroughly, and he said that he saw no reason whatsoever why it should not be passed. That's his take on it, and that the women who are awaiting signatures at LCIW, that's coming, and it is.
Yeah.
My girls are coming out. My girls are coming out.
And I guess I could tell folks kind of what sort of the model is for the legislation that that is being proposed and was proposed last year. So it has a number of components, but I think one main thing is in the context of human trafficking, there have been justification defenses for conduct that happens as a direct result of human trafficking. And so the legislation that I hopefully going to be proposed again this legislative session in Louisiana makes a connection between, so it's that, but it's not just for human trafficking, it's also for survivors of intimate partner violence and survivors of sexual violence. So instead of looking at whether survivors conduct meets the very narrow definition of self-defense that we have all throughout the country, it looks at whether their conduct is a direct result of their victimization. And I think one thing that's kind of interesting from a policy perspective is, you know, we have self-defense laws, right? And so traditional self-defense is there has to be an imminent risk of great bodily harm or death for someone to be able to use lethal force. But we also have all sorts of other justification laws based on the Castle Doctrine, stand your ground, like you're allowed to use lethal force to protect your property, you know, if someone isn't leaving your property. And so I think one thing that we try to do through our policy advocacy is point out some of those contradictions and point out how they misalign with our purported values. Like if we care about survivors of gender-based violence, we shouldn't put the value of someone's property, you know, above the value of being free from harm and safe. And the legislation that's being proposed also includes components that other jurisdictions have, like New York, that would allow for resentencing, that would ensure expanded access to expert testimony, and would ensure that this relief is retroactive. So, you know, a lot of times we fix laws in Louisiana, but these laws only apply prospectively, and we just forget everyone who's already in prison. And I think, you know, we as a program, we're just there to provide policy models and education. But I think the advocates who are pushing for this legislation are really want to make sure that people aren't left behind. So, yeah.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
It's not over yet. There's more.
Yeah. Well, maybe do we want to move into the access to justice portion, and then if folks have questions for either program, we can address them at once. Or...
Yes, we do. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us past 5 o'clock on a Friday. We're so excited to talk to you about our project. I'm very grateful to be up here with my collaborators. I'm gonna skip introductions for the moment because we did that. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the origins of the project, then pass it off to Candace and Mr. Ofred, who have been instrumental in increasing the impact of this work. And then we'll talk about where the project is headed. So as you heard before, just click this. There's no right to counsel in post-conviction proceedings. That includes parole and pardon as well. So the vast majority of this litigation is being done by pro se litigants who are incarcerated and counsel substitutes. And we're gonna get this going in 1 second. So yeah, you might have heard counsel substitutes sometimes referred to as jailhouse lawyers. And I want to talk a little bit about who are counsel substitutes. This project, here we go. Who are counsel substitutes? On our Access to Justice project, we're partnering with the counsel substitutes at the Correctional Institute for Women. So right now, there are 6 incarcerated women serving as counsel subs and who we're partnering with on this project that we'll get into. So these are women who are serving decades-long to life sentences, almost entirely self-taught on the law, supporting anywhere from 50 to 100 other incarcerated women seeking all different types of legal relief for a few cents an hour full-time. And they have extremely limited access and resources. So the Women's Prison Project came up with this Access to Justice program because in addition to the fundamental barriers that incarceration imposes on anyone's ability to do legal work, women's legal cases have very distinctive features. Women tend to go to prison for different reasons at different stages in their lives. And the Women's Law Library has historically been under-resourced when you compare it to men's facilities in Louisiana, specifically Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. So imagine the powerful impact of a collaboration between the women I just described to you working inside LCIW and all of the incredible experts and advocates that you've heard from today. At WPP, that is the origin story of this project. The goal was to develop a model program that would include a practice manual, training modules, and a resource bank that were specifically tailored to the types of issues that come up in women's cases. So for example, counsel substitutes working inside the Louisiana Correctional, the LCIW, don't have access to expert affidavits to support their claims for ineffective assistance of counsel related to intimate partner violence. So we are collaborating with them to meet those needs. The goal really is to expand access to courts and legal relief for criminalized survivors who are either representing themselves pro se or being supported by counsel substitutes, creating the ability to finally and meaningfully address the complex issues of abuse and trauma that are often overlooked as a primary pathway to prison for most incarcerated women. Also often overlooked is that those who are most impacted by abuse, both interpersonally and systemically, are the experts of their own experiences and their needs. So through this work, we're realizing that the effectiveness of this collaboration is directly related to the quality of our relationships. So we have been moving at the speed of trust and taking time, using restorative practices and other trauma-informed approaches to work towards legal empowerment, removing barriers, providing resources to the counsel substitutes at LCIW. And through this, we realized the true extent of the limits to access that the counsel subs at LCIW face, and that this couldn't just be a project where we would provide some trainings and provide some resources on intimate partner violence. We learned about a whole host of other issues, very limited access to technology, Wi-Fi, records, physical storage space for files. And so we'll get into a little bit later how we've broadened our scope beyond how it was initially, how the project originated, to develop a comprehensive program that would actually be able to achieve freedom for criminalized survivors. Okay. Then we realized that to accomplish our goals, we still needed additional experts on our team. We needed people on the team who are familiar and through their lived experience, understand and empathize with the needs and circumstances of the women that we're collaborating with inside LCIW. So it's really an honor to be up here today with Ms. Malone and Mr. Ofrey. I'll start by giving a short introduction. Mr. Everett Ofrey was a counsel substitute at the Louisiana State Penitentiary for 17 years. He represented hundreds of other incarcerated people, supporting many of them in achieving their freedom. Today, he works at the Orleans Public Defender's Office as a client advocate liaison in their resentencing project. He's an ambassador for the Visiting Room Project. He's also a mentor for young people for the Freedom Foundation. And I'm honored to introduce you and turn it over to Everett Ofrey, also known as Buff, to talk a little bit more about his work on this project.
How y'all doing? Glad y'all came. Thank y'all for having me. Like she said, Hannah said, 17 and a half years I worked in a prison law library, but I did 27 and a half years in prison. Convicted of second degree murder, sentenced to die in prison, but God had other plans. And what I heard about the Women Project and the work they were doing and had a chance to work with them, it was like a miracle, because some of the same issues that I knew that needed to be addressed, they wanted to address. And when I was in prison, I used to be thinking about this, man, how could we kind of like expand the things that we do, like you said, and go to the prison that I was in. We kind of like had a specialized knowledge in a lot of this stuff because we've been doing it for so long, and everybody that ain't go got like sentences. So, the average person been there 30 years or better. So, and they've been doing this legal work for 30 years or better. So what I was able to do what I'm able to do with the Women's Project is give them a real life experience of how it is on the ground for real. You know, the lawyers may know what the law says, but in prison, we have to apply it in different kind of ways and different methods. We like the last line of defense. The counsel subs, when she talk about the inmate jailhouse lawyers, they're like the final line of defense for the guys after their conviction and sentence become final. So just giving them an understanding on how these laws are litigated from in prison, how the prison conditions affects your ability to be able to help people, how understanding like the barriers that come between meeting deadlines, the reality of meeting these deadlines versus the rule saying you have 30 days. We have to figure out how to meet that 30-day deadline in every which way possible. And I'm sharing that experience with the Women's Project to give them that real life experience to like let them know that look, these problems do exist, and we've been kind of trying to solve these problems, coming up with a collaborative method and trying to solve these problems. Like they said numerous of times, it's unique because you got people from all different walks of the law. And what I know, coupled with what everybody else know, is all gonna help the good. So it's been an experience for me, learning about a lot of stuff. And like I was telling somebody today, just hearing the women talk earlier about the domestic violence, you're in an all-male prison, you ain't even thinking about domestic violence. And it wasn't until the Curley case came that I kind of had an understanding of how that it was real. And the more I talk with Hannah about it and hearing these women talk about it, it's like opening my mind up more and more. So, you know, it's a great thing.
Thanks, Buff. Yeah, we feel very privileged to have the level of legal knowledge and expertise that Buff brings. And it's just been so critical helping us figure out what are creative solutions to the particular problems that are presented for people doing legal work in prison at every single stage of a case. So now I'm going to do a brief intro. I know most everybody knows a little bit about Ms. Candace Malone, new mom, very well recognized advocate and spokesperson for domestic issues in the law, certified paralegal, does sign language interpretation, customer service, and on customer service representative. And on top of all that, is completing her degree in social services and still finds time to consult with us as an expert. And so I'm really excited to hear her talk about her work with WPP.
Okay, first to give a bit of background, when I went into the prison system, one of my first encounters with the sub-council was horrific. As a survivor of intimate partner violence, I finally decided after a couple of years, once I had exhausted my appeals, by which I had an attorney to do so, I decided that I would seek the help of the sub-councils. And when I spoke to the woman that was appointed as my sub-council, it felt as though she could care less about what I was inquiring about or what I had gone through. So I never forget, I just turned around and I left the library that day and I decided that I will never use another sub-council ever again. So the expertise that I offer to the Women's Prison Project is in the realm of intimate partner violence and how to navigate the legal systems from within a prison environment. Doing a lot of proposed work that I think would shape the environment of the prison better by making the way in which women are able to obtain assistance from the sub-councils something of ease by placing emphasis on women that are involved in intimate partner violence, because you don't want the person whose life you may be responsible for, and you don't want to be the person whose life someone is responsible for, that when you first meet, there's a clash, and then there's never the understanding that you all can actually work together. So I am doing a lot of work in trying to construct a proposal and how we can make that a lot easier, as well as proposing a model code of ethics for how to deal with cases, especially with women who deal with intimate partner violence. For women that do deal with it, it's extremely hard to trust and to be in a setting where you feel like you can't trust anybody. That's not going to get you quite far. So I'm doing a lot of proposed work in that area. And also I'm able to spot the issues that were there at the prison during my time there. And so I'm able to offer advice and try to construct ways in which I think and that would be helpful in offering to the Women's Prison Project that would make not just for the women who experience intimate partner violence, but also for the sub-councils. You know, we have 6 sub-councils and they have a large population of women that they're entrusted to try and help achieve their freedom. So we want to make the process for them as well to be something of ease to where they can choose the cases possibly that they could work on and do that effectively. And, you know, again, that's just, it seems simple, but there's actually a lot of work and thought that goes into it because like Sandra stated earlier, there are a lot of constraints and issues at the women's prison that need to be addressed. So hopefully with these proposed projects, those things can get addressed and more women will be able to get the right effective assistance and come home one day.
Yeah, thank you, Candace, for sharing that. I think, yeah, just to contextualize, we'll get into a little bit. Candace is speaking to a model program that we're proposing that Candace has been very helpful in helping us configure and figure out. And also specifically, Candace is responsible for developing the first ever intimate partner violence screening questionnaire to be used by council subs at LCIW, as well as creating the base for a model code of ethics based on her experience and understanding with the council subs while she was incarcerated. So yeah, those are just some of the very specific things that yeah, Candace has contributed. So thank you. We've also on the project been consulting and connecting with people doing similar work outside of Louisiana. An example is the Jailhouse Lawyers Initiative, which is a law clinic program out of the Bernstein Center for Human Rights at NYU, which is led by a former jailhouse lawyer named Jody Polk. They fuse legal education, movement building, participatory research, and advocacy to ensure that jailhouse lawyers have what they need, the resources they need to know and use and shape the law. So they also are working under the framework of legal empowerment, shifting power and resources so that jailhouse lawyers can activate systems and lead struggles for justice. One of the interesting things that we've learned through this collaboration is that it wasn't just that women needed additional specific resources to address issues related to intimate partner violence and gender-specific legal claims. We learned that they don't have access to very basic legal and institutional knowledge and information that's relatively routine for council substitutes housed at Angola, like Buck was explaining. So the disparity between what's happening at the women's facility and the men's facility was drastically different. So we've started to work to create meaningful connections and networks of communication for the women housed at LCIW with other council subs across the state who are doing this work. So as a result of the incredible expertise on this team and our relationship with the Department of Corrections, we expanded our project's reach. We were able to develop relationships with council subs from all over the state of Louisiana. And on January 18th, co-created and facilitated a symposium where 100 council subs from all over the state, from all DOC facilities across the state came together to learn with the legal experts on our team, strategize and think creatively about the legal issues they're facing. Because like, as I mentioned before, the prison law library at Angola, while it still has serious limitations, it also has resources and access that the women's prison does not. So facilitating the symposium was part of the project's goals to ensure that women are receiving the knowledge and experience of the better resourced programs, as well as having their particular gender-specific needs addressed. So where are we headed? You know, like I said, the program started with a focus on the different resources, education, and materials to address intimate partner violence at the women's prison, but we learned that there are a lot more needs that the council subs and incarcerated survivors at LCIW have. It's not just about resources. So we are now thinking about program design issues that make their already very difficult work virtually impossible. So we're working together, the folks up here, and we're collaborating with the council subs inside to think proactively and create a model council substitute program to address some of the bigger system design issues that affect their work. So the question we're asking is, what would a well-resourced model council substitute program look like? And we're looking at everything that you see here, from physical space needs, technology, resources, accessibility, prioritization of cases, council subs developing specializations, developing a model code of ethics. And, we think that this approach is also educationally important for students as well. We're going to be working with the criminal justice clinic students to facilitate follow-up workshops at the women's prison and other satellite facilities to address council sub specific questions related to post-conviction proceedings like pardon and parole and requesting records. And what's different about our approach is, and what will be demonstrated in these follow-up sessions with the students, is that we're really trying to challenge the power dynamics that lawyers so often have in their client relationships and teach a new generation of law students what it is like to collaborate and work with your clients and people who are incarcerated. So we think we're going to learn a lot from this project and this collaboration about what could be replicated elsewhere in terms of program design, empowerment models for council subs and jailhouse lawyers, and the kinds of resources, support, and advocacy needed for these programs to be effective. So just to close it out, we're coming to an end now. Thanks everybody for sticking with us. I cannot express the impact of the work better than the council subs inside LCIW can. So I included here, this first one is a contribution from one of the longest serving council subs at LCIW, Ms. Pierre. She sent us this message when asked about what this collaboration and what this access to justice program means to her. And she said, "The model program is a long-awaited prayer. My work no longer seems in vain. With WPP, I am less stressed and super hopeful to right wrongs while confined to these walls. The lives of the incarcerated matter, whether it is before, after, or during the incarceration process. Supporting us supports all residents of Louisiana." And then one more from Ms. Mulla, who is one of the newer council subs at LCIW, that I'd like to share about the impact of our program, says, "To work with WPP in developing a council sub program has been extremely meaningful. Since we live with our clients and we know them, we want to give them the best advice and work that we can. However, we have not had any real training. So by working with you all, we are able to ask questions, get feedback, discuss strategies and guidance. We can only do what we know, and by working with you all, we are gaining the knowledge and tools needed, as well as the resources to put forth writs with real merit. The council program that needs to be implemented in all prisons." So thank you, everybody, for sticking with us and learning about our Access to Justice program. We're really excited about where it started and where it's headed and the incredible collaborative team that we're building. I left another quote up here that y'all can read, and that's all. Yeah, do people have questions?